Arthur's fingernails dug into the cold, grease-stained concrete floor of the security booth, his knuckles turning white in the suffocating darkness. He didn't dare breathe. Each shallow gasp felt like a roar in the dead silence of 3 in the morning. Outside, the world was swallowed by the thick, rural fog of the secondary highway. But inches away, something was making a sound that defied logic. Scree! A slow, deliberate scratching against the bulletproof glass. It wasn't the sound of someone trying to break in. It was the sound of something marking its territory. Arthur's eyes were fixed on the control panel. The magnetic lock's LED glowed a mocking green. He had pressed it. He had opened the only barrier between him and the void. Just minutes ago, his tired brain had rationalized the shadow outside as a woman in distress, a mother needing help for a sick child. He told himself his trembling hands were just a symptom of a double shift and too much caffeine. He chose empathy over the survival instinct that was screaming at him to stay locked inside. Now, the scratching stopped. A heavy, wet thud hit the door. It didn't need to force its way in. It knew the latch was free. How could a simple act of kindness turn into a death sentence? How did Arthur, a man who just wanted to help, end up waiting for his own executioner to push the door open? Arthur thought his kindness would save a life. But in the dark isolation of this highway, empathy is a deadly trap. Would you have the strength to keep that magnetic lock engaged while hearing a desperate plea for help at 3 in the morning? If you would have opened that door like Arthur did, you might not last until dawn. Please, leave a like if you are feeling the tension, comment what you would do in his place, and subscribe to witness if Arthur survives his own mistake. The fluorescent light above Arthur's head flickered with a rhythmic, maddening buzz that seemed to vibrate inside his very skull. It was 02:45 a.m., the hour when the world felt abandoned, left entirely to the shadows and the weary. At 24, Arthur had already learned that the night wasn't just a stretch of time, it was a physical weight. The acrid smell of burnt coffee, sitting in the pot for far too long, clawed at his senses, a bitter reminder of his solitude in this isolated outpost on a secondary highway that led to nowhere. The small bulletproof booth felt like a glass coffin, safe, yet suffocating. He checked the magnetic lock. The red light glowed steady, a silent sentinel protecting him from the vast, dark emptiness outside. Just a few more hours, he whispered to himself, his voice sounding thin and foreign in the oppressive stillness. Then, the silence was broken not by a sound, but by its sudden, heavy absence. A rusted, nondescript sedan rolled into the periphery of the station's flickering lamps, stopping exactly where the artificial light surrendered to the absolute blackness of the surrounding woods. The engine died with a mechanical wheeze. No one emerged. No headlights flashed. Arthur watched, his heart drumming a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong, but his empathy, his fatal recurring flaw, began to weave a different story. "It's just a traveler," he muttered, rubbing his heavy eyelids until he saw stars. "He's exhausted, just like me. He probably needs water, or maybe he's just sleeping it off." He blamed his rising dread on the lack of sleep, choosing to rationalize the chilling stillness as mere fatigue. He didn't know yet that his kindness was a trap, and that the rule he was about to break would be the final chapter of his life. The metallic clack of the magnetic bolt echoed inside the tiny, fluorescent-lit booth like a gunshot. It was a sound that should have represented safety, but in that moment, as the red light on the control panel flickered to a dull, mocking green, it sounded like the closing of a coffin lid. My hand was still trembling on the release button, the plastic warm beneath my sweating thumb. Outside, the wind howled across the empty highway, but it wasn't the wind that made the hair on my neck stand up. It was the scratching, a slow, rhythmic scraping of something sharp against the reinforced ballistic glass. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape. I had done it. I had broken the only rule that mattered. I had looked into the face of a tragedy and forgotten that out here, in the middle of nowhere, tragedy is often just a mask for something much hungrier. I stared at the door handle, watching it begin to turn, and realized with a sickening jolt that my empathy had just signed my death warrant. Have you ever felt the exact moment your life changed forever? That split second where a single choice turns a normal night into a waking nightmare? I was just a 24-year-old kid trying to make enough money to fix my life. But in the silence of that rural gas station, I realized I might not have a life left to fix. The scratching stopped, and for one heartbeat, the world went silent. Then, the voice started again. Exactly the same sob. And I knew I wasn't dealing with a human being anymore. Would you have opened that door? Would your conscience allow you to sit behind 6 inches of steel while a woman screamed for her life just 5 feet away? We all like to think we are the heroes of our own stories, that our kindness is our greatest strength. But tonight, I learned that in the dark corners of the world, kindness is nothing more than a weakness to be exploited. Before you judge me for what I did, ask yourself, how much do you trust your own senses when the clock strikes 3 in the morning and the shadows begin to move? If you think you're safe because you're a good person, you're already dead. Stay with me, because what happened next isn't just a ghost story, it's a warning. The gas station was a relic of a different era, a concrete island surrounded by an ocean of cornfields and decaying woods. At 24, I felt like a king of a very small, very lonely empire. The steel box, as the older guards called the booth, was my sanctuary. It was supposed to be impenetrable. I had the monitors, the emergency radio, and the magnetic lock system that could withstand a ramming truck. The rules were simple, printed on a laminated sheet taped to the desk. 1. Check all perimeters at midnight. 2. Never leave the booth for any reason. 3. After 03 a.m., do not, under any circumstances, disengage the magnetic lock until sunrise. I used to laugh at that last one. I told myself it was just to keep the local drunks from bothering us or to prevent robberies in the dead of night. I was arrogant. I thought my fatigue was the only enemy I had to face. The coffee was cold, the air conditioner was humming a low, dissonant tune, and the silence of the highway was absolute. Until 02:45. That's when the headlights appeared at the edge of the property, barely visible through the thick mist. They didn't move. They just sat there, two pale eyes watching me from the darkness. I told myself it was just a traveler resting, or maybe a mechanical failure. I rationalized the fear, calling it night shift paranoia. I didn't want to be afraid. I wanted to be professional. But the air inside the booth suddenly felt very, very thin. I checked the clock. 02:58. Almost 3. Almost the time when the rules changed. My eyes were heavy, my brain clouded by 12 hours of isolation. Then, the car doors didn't open, but a figure emerged from the gloom, running toward the booth with a frantic, stumbling gait. The silhouette of a woman. She reached the glass, her face obscured by her hands, her body racking with sobs that I could hear even through the soundproofing. "Please," she wailed, the sound muffled but piercing. "Please help me. There was an accident. My baby. He's not breathing. Please open the door." My heart stopped. Every instinct I had as a human being screamed at me to help. I looked at the clock. 003:01. The rule was now in effect. But she was right there. I could see the tears dripping from between her fingers. I could see her chest heaving. I looked at the dark road, thinking of a crashed car and a dying child. My empathy, that deep-seated need to be the savior, overrode the logic of the laminated sheet. I told myself the rule was for suspicious characters, not for mothers in mourning. I told myself I was being a man, not a coward. With a shaking hand, I reached for the button. "Hold on!" I yelled. "I'm opening it. Just stay calm." I pressed the button. Click. The magnetic seal broke. I stood up, ready to rush out and help her. But then I froze. The woman didn't move. She didn't reach for the door. She didn't look up. Instead, she spoke again. "Please, please help me. There was an accident. My baby. He's not breathing. Please open the door." Her voice was identical. Every inflection, every sob, every gasp for air was a perfect carbon copy of the first time she said it. It wasn't a plea. It was a recording. She repeated it a third time, and this time, her hands dropped from her face. There was nothing there. No eyes, no nose, just a smooth, pale surface that mimicked the shape of a head. The sob came from a slit where a mouth should have been, but it didn't move in sync with the words. It was like a broken record playing through a meat puppet. My blood turned to ice. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't saved anyone. I had just invited the darkness inside. The door, now unlatched, began to creak open, pushed by a pale, elongated hand that certainly wasn't human. The rationalization was gone. The fatigue was gone. There was only the cold, hard reality that I had broken the rule, and now the rule was going to break me. The silence that followed her mechanical plea was not the silence of a sleeping night. It was the silence of a vacuum, sucking the very oxygen from my lungs. I watched, paralyzed, as the woman, or whatever had stolen her shape, slowly lowered her hands from her face. My heart, which had been hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, seemed to stop entirely. It wasn't just that she looked wrong. It was that she looked like a drawing of a human made by someone who had only ever heard a vague description of what a face should be. Her skin had the texture of wet parchment, stretched too tight over a skull that was slightly the wrong shape. And the eyes. God, the eyes. They were wide, lidless, and entirely empty. There was no iris, no pupil, just a swirling, oily darkness that didn't reflect the flickering fluorescent light of the booth. She didn't blink. She didn't even breathe. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I had opened the door to something that didn't belong in this world. My hand was still hovering near the control panel, but my fingers felt like lead. The mechanical loop of her voice started again, but this time her mouth didn't move in sync with the words. Please. Help. Me. Accident. Please. It was a recording played through a throat of meat and bone. Then, the sound stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, vibrating hum that I felt in my teeth. She reached out. Her fingers were unnaturally long, the joints bending in ways that made my stomach churn. Her hand gripped the edge of the heavy glass door, the door I had so foolishly unlocked. Slowly, with a strength that felt impossible, she began to pull. The magnetic lock, which I hadn't yet re-engaged, offered no resistance. The door creaked, a long, agonizing groan of metal against metal that sounded like a scream. I saw the gap widening, 1 inch, 2 inches. The cold air of the night rushed in, smelling of dead leaves and something metallic, like old blood. Panic, sharp and electric, finally broke through my paralysis. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound, and threw myself forward. I didn't use my hands. I used my entire body, slamming my shoulder and hip against the cold glass. The creature didn't flinch. Through the glass, I could see its face, just inches from mine. It wasn't angry. It wasn't hungry. It was curious. It leaned its head to the side at an impossible 90-degree angle, its empty eyes boring into my soul. I pushed with everything I had. My boots slid on the linoleum floor, searching for grip. I could feel the creature's counter-pressure. It was like trying to push back a mountain. It wasn't an explosive strength, but a steady, inevitable force. No, no, no! I gasped, my face pressed against the glass, my breath fogging the surface. I could see the creature's grin now. It didn't have teeth, just a jagged ridge of white bone that pushed through its gums. It was a parody of a smile. I felt my strength fading. My muscles were screaming, and the exhaustion I had tried to rationalize earlier was now a heavy shroud threatening to pull me down. But then, I saw her hand slipping. The sweat on my own body, the sheer desperation of a man who knows he is looking at his own grave, gave me one final surge of adrenaline. I planted my back against the inner counter and kicked the door with both feet. The door slammed shut with a deafening crack that echoed through the small booth. My hand flew to the control panel, and I smashed the lock button so hard I thought I'd break the plastic. The heavy thud of the magnetic bolts engaging was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I collapsed onto the floor, my chest heaving, sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't dare look up. I stayed there, curled in a ball, waiting for the glass to shatter, waiting for the end. But the end didn't come. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. The scratching stopped. The humming stopped. Finally, I forced myself to look. The space outside the window was empty. The creature was gone. I could see its footprints in the dust of the pavement, long, distorted shapes that led back toward the darkness of the trees. I let out a breath I felt I'd been holding since 03 a.m. I was safe. I was alive. I reached for my phone to call the police, to call anyone, but then a sound came from right outside the glass. It wasn't a scratch. It was a voice. It wasn't the mechanical, hollow voice from before. It was warm. It was familiar. It was the voice that used to tuck me in at night and tell me everything would be okay. Arthur? Arthur, honey, it's cold out here. Won't you let me in? My mother's voice, perfect in every inflection, every note of maternal concern. But my mother has been dead for 5 years. I stared into the darkness, the phone shaking in my hand, as the voice continued to call my name, drifting further and further into the woods until it was nothing but a whisper in the wind. We survived another shift, but the night always returns. It waits for us to be tired, it waits for us to be kind, and it waits for us to break the rules. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't have to face the dark alone, and tell me in the comments which city you're listening to this story from.